Good evening, this is the Oscar Expert here with Brother Bro, and it's time for our top 10 films of 2022. It is March, we are late, but we're here now to present these picks. Why don't you give us some of your honorable mentions? Honorable mentions, I've got Tar, Bardo, Turning Red, The Fallout, RRR, Cha Cha Real Smooth, The Menu, and Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick, almost is in here. Really? Yeah, I watched it again and I was like, ooh, there's this little tear in my eye. What's going on here? I guess I just don't have, a personal connection with the movie, and that's why I'm like, it's 11. Turning Red, Apollo 10.5, White Noise, All the Beauty and the Bloodshed, The Northman, Hit the Road, Tar, and Decision to Leave. And We're All Going to the World's Fair doesn't count because I saw it last year, but I did like that more on a rewatch this year, and some people count it as a this year movie. Hit the Road is really well directed and acted and very interesting, and I watched it twice in a row. And Decision to Leave was kind of hard to leave off because on my third watch of that movie it did hit a little bit harder for me. But you know what? The top 10 has been chosen. My number 10 is Triangle of Sadness. I had a boatload of fun with this movie. Boatload. The dialogue was delicious, especially in the Czech scene and in the scene when Woody Harrelson and the Russian man get on the loudspeakers of the ship. I saw this at TIFF, and every comedy that I saw at TIFF I thought was extremely funny, and that definitely had to do with the fact that I was in a crowd. I feel sort of weird about the people who I've talked to who didn't see it in a crowd and were like, yeah, that movie wasn't super funny to me, and I'm like, really? Really? Because I just found it hilarious. All the beats were just working for me in an audience, and there's another comedy in this, a pure comedy in this list that I thought was also hilarious. I actually don't even think this is Ruben Östlund's best. I really love Force Majeure, but it is yet another scrumptious feast of a film. I appreciate a film that kind of works on its own level, and the structure definitely does that. I can see how it would create a lot of problems for you. The third act did create a little bit of a problem for me in that it felt a little bit long, and I don't understand the last shot. So it did boop down a little bit for me, but I was really enjoying it. The other thing is I'm not sure, it's kind of weird that I'm criticizing it, but I'm also not sure exactly what kind of film Ruben Östlund thought he was making. I feel like he might think he's a very righteous liberal, but the movie actually doesn't come across as super liberal, because in the end you sort of have this naturalism argument for capitalism, but it doesn't argue that that's good. I don't think it cares whether it's good or bad. I think it just puts people in this situation where oh, suddenly when the hierarchy is flipped, you believe the opposite thing. And that is a very astute observation. I actually think it works really well the way that it is as a commentary on hypocrisy. I don't think it needs to be firmly on one side. It actually makes me really like the movie. Every performance is great. I've been saying it all year. This should have gotten a SAG Ensemble nomination. And Ruben Östlund just has one of the most unique voices in comedy. Really glad that this film cracked the Best Picture lineup, and hopefully his films to come do the same thing. My number 10, I decided on Layla's Brothers. If there's one reason I put this above Decision to Leave, it's maybe just because nobody has talked about it the entire year, and for good reason. It did not come out. Got banned in Iran because they didn't get permission to go to Cannes, and they wouldn't have let them go to Cannes because it's critical of the government. And there were two actors who got accused of sexual assaulting a person after the movie released, and maybe that's made distributors not want to pick it up. I'm not sure if that's a reason too. Maybe, but regardless, imagine being the director or producer of a film and then finding out that your actor's background is what is tanking your movie that you also worked hard on. I don't think that should make a movie not come out. You can cancel someone and not disregard the work that a lot of people put into it. Yeah, I mean, the two lead actors and the director, I really want more things for this director and writer. What an amazingly written film. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes, sprawling tale of this family's economic hardships, and there's this really interesting relationship they have with their father who has more wealth than they do, and everybody's trying to clamor for the wealth to make the dreams come true that they feel like they are owed. There are so many good performances in this movie. A lot of this film is just long scenes where the actors are just debating each other and what to do, and I found the movie to be pretty riveting. I feel it really justified the 2 hour 45 minute runtime, because the longer it went on, I was like, are you sure that you should be going on for this long? But it kept adding something to the story of substance. So I don't know what this movie's doing. It's in limbo at this point, and that's unfortunate, because at Cannes I was kind of raving about this movie and hoping that everybody would get to see it, and I was like, adapted screenplay nomination, let's let's go. And not even a release. You had Worst Person in the World get your screenplay nomination. You can't have it 2 years in a row. I got Paul Mescal to have Best Actor nomination. You would have nominated that for many more awards. I would have nominated Worst Person in the World and Teton for more awards too, but we get a small victory every year. My number 9 is The Fabelmans. The first time I watched this, I was definitely more in the camp of like, it felt a little bit overcooked, like the acting was a little bit over the top, and it had a little bit of like a plasticky quality to it. The second watch, I just let none of that stuff bother me, and I really enjoyed it. I'm a huge fan of Spielberg's films like from 20 years ago and back. And I feel like, yeah, he doesn't quite reach the heights that he used to. But nonetheless, I feel that there are not that many filmmakers giving quite the attention to every level of craft that he and his cinematographer and his editor do. There's some really memorable and powerful scenes in this film. When little Steven is going through his film and cutting, and there's this like beautiful shot when the camera just goes all the way around the room and then to his face as he's like having a revelation, and the music is completely meeting that moment. And then there's that scene when Michelle Williams watches the film on the projector and you just have the pushing on her face. I mean, there's just beautiful moments. I feel that Spielberg dug pretty deep into his childhood, and yeah, maybe he didn't find anything extraordinary. Like, there are people walking out of this film going, well, yeah, my parents got a divorce. It was yeah, this is what it's like. And, you know, I agree, but I feel like that's what makes the film charming in a way. He made his childhood come to life, and it was a very humble story about someone who could have been anybody. I like that we don't even know if he became Steven Spielberg just in terms of the story. I mean, you do. I know you do, but it doesn't focus on like his fame. The biopic would be all about how do we show our adoration for this figure who we know is just amazing, and I feel like this film just avoids that, which is really nice. My number 9 is Triangle of Sadness. I had the pleasure of experiencing this movie with knowing nothing about it because I saw it at Cannes. You know, it's unfortunate that other people couldn't get that. I understand the trailer is going to make it very difficult because it shows the island and you're like, okay, so they end up on the island. Like, I know how that happened. But like, when I watched this movie, it opened up on 2 people arguing over a check, then they went on a boat, and then everything else happened, and I had no idea anything else was gonna happen. And it was just a blast to watch on that first time. The second time, I don't think quite lived up to that first watch for that reason, and I would say I don't think the satire got any deeper for me watching it again, but I did really appreciate the attention to detail. The movie feels so finely tuned. The awkward pauses, just the dryness of every scene, I love. Even great little touches like a fly buzzing around in the scene, or like the windshield wipers in the car while they're arguing, or the elevator doors opening and closing. Like, I love all those little touches in this movie. The performances are also just such a treat. Harris Dickinson, Charles B. Dean, Zlatko Buric, and of course Dolly De Leon. They're all really amazing in this. And of course, you know, the middle scene, everyone vomiting, and then Zlatko Buric getting on the microphone while drunk and saying, "The ship is going under." Give me the giggles, okay? The movie's not gonna change the world with a satire, okay? We need to stop putting that pressure on satires where it's like, you think you're changing the world, but you're not. It's like, chill. But it pokes fun at the right things in a very fun way, and that's enough for me. My number 8 is Women Talking. I'd say a little bit of the same thing that I felt about The Fabelmans, where the acting style is like not completely my thing, but again, like once the story starts to kick in and I get invested in what the filmmaker is trying to do, I don't care about the style and the form as much, and I'm just in the story. I don't really know how to feel about the fact that this became like the vegetables portion of the Oscar Best Picture lineup, like the oh, you have to eat your green beans, like, but you don't necessarily want to. You know, my experience of it was I saw it at TIFF and everybody liked it a lot, and it was kind of surprising it came in number 2, second place behind The Fabelmans for the audience award. This is just a deeply, deeply empathetic movie. It's about women trying to correct society's ills while not having power themselves. I think it really puts the viewer in the difficult position that all of the women in this film are in, where they take the ability to shape society into their own hands and say, well, we want to do away with these terrible things about it, but then how do we carry society forward? And they ask some very realistic questions. And I like that this film gets a little bit past, I would say, where most people cannot get past today because of social media and like the destructive discourse that happens, where we get up to identifying the problem and then like just completely fall apart whenever we attempt to go towards the solution. And it is a really messy process to try to get there. And I think this film touches on that messiness, and it allows for people to bring up nuanced and different points and have a discourse about it. And what happened to the performances in this movie? Claire Foy and Jessie Buckley would have been worthy, but I actually think my favorite performance is Ben Wishaw's. He takes a character that could have easily been like, oh, I have no desire, I'm just very dismissive, I'm completely stripped of all sexuality, and he makes him into someone else. Makes it into a very complex character. This film writes more complexity and more nuance into its men than it really needed to make a point, because I don't think it's going for like the easy shallow one. I think it's like really trying to get you to dig deep. There are a lot of like really beautiful lines in the movie, just single lines that just hit you in the chest. I hope it gets adapted screenplay win. My number 8 is The Banshees of Inisherin. This is Martin McDonagh operating at peak form. The dialogue in this movie is really snappy, witty, and while this movie is very funny, it is also thought-provoking. And the second time I watched this movie, I kind of came away thinking, oh, so this is kind of what the movie's about. And then I thought, actually, maybe it's not really quite about that. And then I was like, oh, maybe the movie's not as good as I thought it was. But since then, I've seen like different interpretations that I've been interested in, and then I was kind of starting to appreciate the fact that this movie can be read in different ways, and they all make some sort of sense. It's sort of this perfect little fable, a very simple story about this fallout between two friends, and it's interesting how audiences can come away with different understandings of what really is the core of what went wrong and the different layers of each character. I think if you look closer into the movie, maybe you get more sympathetic towards Coleman. Maybe you get less sympathetic towards Podrick, depending on like how you're looking at the movie. And it's really one of the finest acted films of the year. My number 7 is Bros. What the hell happened, guys? What happened to Bros? Did you see it? I really wish this film did better. I'm not sure what exactly happened. It's another one that I saw at TIFF where the audience was extremely enthusiastic, and I thought it was fucking hilarious. It was easily one of the funniest movies that I've seen, probably. Had me laughing one of the most times. Especially the scene when he meets his boyfriend's parents. It is never easy to make something funny, and it is really hard to make something very funny, but this film feels so effortless in succeeding with its comedy. It has the right balance of irreverence and giving you something to sink your teeth into. It makes you care about the relationship, and it is genuinely romantic. And it also felt like it was making observations that other films just haven't been able to, because these are observations concerning gay people and the lives that they live. Billy Eichner made something that felt really true to his experience. He made a film about the things that he thought were funny, and I thought they were fucking funny because it just resonated. It felt true. Felt like I was in his perspective. Not only did I laugh a lot, but it felt like there was just a heart and soul poured into this movie. I hope we get more stuff like this, but who knows if we will at this point. I don't have anything negative to say actually about this film. I feel like it was just a pitch perfect comedy. I'm sad that other people didn't seem to see it that way. Before I talk about Bros, I gotta talk about The Fabelmans. Like you, the second viewing of this movie really is where it took off for me. Really, it's an exploration of like the soul of an artist and these people who feel compulsion to create, even when it is impractical, even when it comes at the expense of family. Seeing Sammy Fabelman and the ways in which he has his great uncle and his mother in him, I thought the mother-son relationship was really well done. Looking at the movie more closely through that relationship made me appreciate Michelle Williams' performance a lot more too. I also think that Gabriel Bell is excellent. Judd Hirsch, Paul Dano, very good too. It's not just a movie about like the magic of movie making. It's actually at times a little bit about the opposite. Like it's kind of about the magic of movie making. It's about how movie making can inform who we are, and we can see who we are through the things that we make. But it's also about the tortured soul of being an artist. And the cinematography in this movie went very overlooked this year. Continuing talking about yet another Best Picture nominee, Banshees of Inisherin again. Easily one of the best acted movies this year. I really love rewatching scenes on YouTube, and I feel like I could just watch each scene like 3 times just to pick up on the nuances of the performances. I think the editing is magnificent. It gives just the right amount of time for the performances to breathe and for a lot of the punchlines to live in reaction shots. It played extremely well to my audience at TIFF. It seemed like it was very finely tuned to the points where it knew they were gonna laugh. And I haven't seen that be so obvious in a film and I don't know when. But weirdly enough, it played well in that theater of 1,000 people when everyone was laughing throughout, and it also played well on my couch and as a more sobering drama. It paints 2 characters, neither of whom is more righteous or more justified in their position than the other one. And that's, I think, why people keep revisiting this film and coming back to it, because it doesn't really feed you the answers. It all really starts with this focal point of a mystery deep inside the dark soul of one character. And that, to me, felt like very deeply true. There are parts of ourselves that we're just unfamiliar with, like the little hole of longing and attempting to fill that void. And that often creates a restlessness and a conflict in ourselves and with other people. And we don't really know why that is there. And the movie doesn't even tell us why it's there. It seems like it's a meditation on this sort of dark feature of human nature. What can be said that hasn't already been said about this film? It really is excellent. Number 6 is Bros. I actually think that Billy Eichner's press tour for this movie did taint people's opinion of it, because he made it out like it's virtuous for you to go see this movie and it's the first gay movie ever, and people didn't like that. That's understandable. It's also not the movie. It's not in the movie. None of that's part of the movie. I saw this movie 2 times. And one of them, I was completely unaware of any of this press tour nonsense that was going on. I saw this movie with hundreds of people. Everybody was laughing their asses off, okay? I don't know what happened to where this movie was at TIFF and what happened to it afterwards. Like, this is one of the most fun experiences I've ever had at a comedy. And you can mark that down twice. Two fun experiences. And the second time, I honestly only appreciated the movie more. The jokes are all clever and original, and they are the product of like one person's sense of humor, a very specific sense of humor. And that is something that I think is so lacking in a lot of comedies today. They just feel like they are meant to be broadly appealing and kind of funny for everybody, but not really funny to anybody. And really what makes a great comedy is having a specific sense of humor. Billy Eichner, you know, with his zingers and his pop culture references and just the rapid fire amount of jokes in this movie. I loved it. It was so refreshing. And it's definitely an ode to some of the rom-coms of like the 90s and 80s and whatever. It's a very sweet movie. It has the right amount of heart. And, you know, amidst all the laughter, you are really rooting for these characters. There's great chemistry between Billy Eichner and Luke McFarlane. And both these characters have really interesting flaws. Like, they're actually well-built characters for this story. Their conflict is actually interesting. So even when this movie goes more dramatic, I'm enjoying it just as much as when it's firing as a comedy. It really delivers literally everything you want in a rom-com, and for that reason, it's one of my favorite rom-coms, and no one will take away that enjoyment from me. I enjoyed this movie a lot. I like it a lot. My number 5 is Pinocchio. I don't think people realize how much I like this movie because I haven't really talked about it. I also feel like I need to see it again to absorb everything, because this is a very dense movie in terms of its meaning and its symbolism. There's a lot of like religion parallels in here. You know, this film really had me weeping by the end as a story about the simultaneously horrible burden of having to live and experience, you know, the cruelty of the world. But that cruelty is sort of balanced out by Pinocchio's ability to say, like, I'm going to take on my responsibility as a human being. I'm going to accept that death will come to me, and I'm going to try to be good. I'm going to try to be righteous and not just treat the world as my playground. You know, I think it has some great themes in here about growing up, about the role of a father in a son's life, and also some prescient themes about how society can mold you into being something that is not quite human, and how that is just a pitfall that anybody can really fall into. Treat life like it's important, like it's a gift, and accept all of the terrible things that come to you along the way. Just seeing Geppetto crying over his boy on the beach was just awful for me. I was like, oh my god, ow, like, that just hurts to have my heart ripped out like this. This movie was really beautifully done as well. I love a stop motion film that has existential themes. You know, it just feels like it works. I think all of the stylistic choices were brilliant here by Guillermo del Toro. It feels so distinct from the original. And I think the score was grossly snubbed for the Oscar. That is easily one of the best scores of the year. What the hell happened there? I don't know. My number 5 is Cha Cha Real Smooth. You know, I feel like what separates the top 5 from everything else, maybe the top 6 though, is like these movies just are very immediate in the way that they hit me, or like emotional. Like we're entering territory of like movies that got tears out of me, really. Cha Cha Real Smooth is a movie that at last year's Sundance, everybody was freaking out and they were like, this is the best movie of the festival, and then it won the best movie of the festival, and then everyone was like, huh, was it the best movie of the festival? Are we about to overhype the shit out of this movie and then have to backtrack? And honestly, I feel like people did backtrack on this movie. So I watched it again, and I was like, no, don't forget the feeling that you had watching that. I feel like I did forget. That was actually a really good movie, and I liked it maybe even better on the second viewing.
Wow.
It's a great portrait of the gap between, you know, when you're in your 20s and when you're in your 30s, and this 20-year-old who kind of thinks like, I am at the peak of me, like this is who I am and I'm not going to change and stuff. And then he looks at a 30-year-old and he's like, we're the same. And then she's like, actually, I'm in my 30s and you don't understand that distance. And I was like, ooh, that's insightful. That's actually really insightful. And I like that it's a movie where the protagonist is really appreciative of the people around him and like the people that are put on his path, whether it's like his ex or his little brother's parents. And it will make you think about the soulmates in your own life and the people that you love and the people that you value, and just reflect on those things and the people that mean things to you. Like that's a great message. It's like a great thing for a movie to make you appreciative of people and stuff. I really admire that this movie wears its heart, like not on its sleeve, on like its face, like right in the middle, right here. Like it just wears the heart right there. And there's something to be said for that, honestly. The last 30 minutes of this movie, like just scene after scene, is really moving and emotional and heartbreaking. And yeah, people forgot about this movie, but I watched it again to make sure I wouldn't, and it shouldn't go forgotten. Remember that Cha Cha Real Smooth is good. You are not wrong, and you should not gaslight yourself. Number 4, a movie I've barely said a fucking word about all year. Also a movie that I kind of have amnesia about, but I know that I really liked it. Bones and all, Luca Guadagnino fucking knocked it out of the park. Like, I thought this thing was so well made and directed and stylized. It feels like it exists in a world apart from other movies. Like, it doesn't feel derivative of other stuff. It could be even a combination of like borrowing a whole bunch of shit from other films, or it's somehow divorced from borrowing stuff from other movies. It's like, you know, if you drew a cool animal, you put a bunny and a giraffe together, and that thing, we'd be like, I've never seen that animal before, but all it is like a bunny plus a giraffe. A girunny? I don't like girunny. I like baraffe. This to me was an excellent example of world building done right. It doesn't need to do some like crane shot showing some way that society is. The conditions that they are in and like the terms that they have to live under are communicated very subtly. Timothée Chalamet and Taylor Russell are excellent in this movie. Mark Rylance is creepy as fuck. Really love the ending. Like, was somehow crying at the end. It's a weird ending, but if it hits you in the right way, that's why I feel like you either like love the movie or you're like, yeah, that was pretty good. Because if you end up crying at this really like kind of weird thing, you just know it got you. It sank its teeth into me. But really, this is a film about the power of loving somebody unconditionally and just overlooking their morality and their flaws. It's just really about what it means to love just so deeply. Bones and all, really. Great production design as well, and great wallpaper. How's the music? I forgot about the music. I have to listen to it on Spotify. I have amnesia about the music, but I know it was great. It's great. I love the score. I love the score for Bones and all. I watched the movie again, and I actually disagree with a lot of what I said in my review, and I like the movie better. So yeah, I feel like I was like a little bit wrong about it, but you know what? That's okay. My number 4 is Moonage Daydream. This is a movie that I have barely touched on because I watched it recently off of a screener. This is my favorite documentary of the year, clearly. I did not see this, unfortunately. I have not yet to see it. This is a really unique portrait of an artist. The filmmaker, Brett Morgan, even more so than he is a director, like he's an editor. He took like all this footage that was granted to him of David Bowie and he turned it into like this kaleidoscopic experimental odyssey. Like there is a solid structure to it, and you know, it does follow David Bowie's life pretty linearly, but he just oversaturates the fuck out of all these shots and does crazy editing shit. The movie will kind of sway between finding a narrative and having some narration, and then it'll just like kind of explode into visual auditorial like feast and adding all these crazy sound effects. And whenever it hit those explosions, it like earned something emotionally from me. In the beginning of the movie, it's really exploring why somebody would want to portray themselves as being larger than life, like on the stage and with the way that they dress and defying gender and all this stuff. And it keeps shifting as David Bowie undergoes this constant spiritual evolution. Later in life, he enters this experimental phase, and then he goes back and starts making more pop-oriented stuff that's just very immediate. and then he takes a little break and he finds love. I did want to see more explored with the end of his life and the sort of Black Star phase. This movie kind of convinced me that David Bowie lived like one of the most extraordinary lives, not only in his music, but like his travels, his artistic expression through other mediums, and his thirst to keep creating and to evolve and putting himself in situations where he would feel uncomfortable and then from there feel a need to create. Watching his evolution as a person and as an artist throughout his entire life, I found it to be very moving and really made me reflect on my life and my evolution, which I don't even know if I feel like I'm undergoing one, but you know, we all go through evolutions. When I'm 40, I'll feel maybe evolved, maybe. But it also made me want to create art and music and stuff. I really love this movie and I really connected with it. My number 3 is a film you've maybe heard me talk about even less than Bones at all, and that is Joyland, because it did not come out. It has not come out. I saw this at TIFF, and lucky people have recently seen this at Sundance, and it has a really strong Letterboxd score. I'm sure it's on a lot of people's watch lists. It should absolutely be on yours. This film encompassed, I think, my favorite kind of style for a movie. It was both very expressive and subdued at the same time. And that was like a sweet spot. It had performances that are like a little bit showy, but for the most part, they're restrained. It had a whole ensemble of characters that felt very real, lived in, and had their own very well-defined perspectives. And the film wasn't really judgmental of anyone here. They just seemed like they were a product of their circumstances. The film has some themes that I think we're very familiar with in the United States and the West overall, of acceptance of who people desire to be and valuing living in a society where people feel free to express themselves, and just acknowledging that at a very deep level, there's like a part of human beings that just want and need to express a sort of identity or a hobby or an interest, and that often poses a conflict with how society wants you to be. And I like how it recontextualizes this battle in a society that I'm completely unfamiliar with. Not only does it have one of the best ensembles of the year, it would deserve like the SAG Ensemble Award. Let's just put it that way. I also think the cinematography was absolutely stunning. The cinematographer shows that not only is he just talented with composition and lighting, but he knows how to transform a sort of ordinary scene into something magnificent. The direction is also really strong because he lets the performances and the actors just breathe within the space that the cinematographer so beautifully creates for them. You know, it really does feel like there's just a lot of detail put into the way that the actors are moving about in the frame or like positioned with one another in the frame. There are many examples here of how you can do a scene beautifully without resorting to like the typical coverage of over the shoulder to over the shoulder. And I think, you know, if it wasn't that well made, it would just be a good movie, but it's, I think, extraordinary just because it's so well crafted and well realized. My number 3 is Women Talking. You know, I rewatched this movie too. I rewatched everything on this list except for Moonage Daydream, really. It is simultaneously very thought-provoking, but it also goes for the heart. It's fascinating to watch these women, all with different perspectives, come together and try to figure out like how to move forward, how to reshape the world that they live in. And it's very insightful about gender roles within society. And I really like how it constantly checks in with how these women are dealing with this conversation in the context of their faith. You know, I was actually glad that this movie didn't necessarily end on a note like, well, what do you think? We don't know. We have no idea. Like, it actually, you know, people come to an understanding. And when they do, it's actually quite uplifting and hopeful. And I appreciate that the movie wants to give you that. It may seem intimidating to go into because the subject matter is so bleak, but really the movie does want you to feel hopeful and feel good about looking towards the future. I think Rooney Mara's performance in this movie is really underrated, as well as Jessie Buckley. I mean, I think she should have gotten the Oscar nomination if there was one supporting performance, as well as Ben Whishaw. I think he was amazing, and that central kinda romance that's going on between him and Rooney Mara was a really great emotional center for this movie, and all the performances are amazing. This might have the best ensemble of the year. Banshees? Well, Banshees, everything ever. I mean, sure, it's up there with all those, but you know, this movie has like 7 or 8 amazing performances, you know. Also the score, how did we overlook this? How did we overlook Hildur here? I don't understand. I don't know what happened. I'm glad this movie managed to get a Best Picture nomination, but it must have been by the skin of its teeth. All right, now for the top 2. And the top 2 for me are distinct from the rest because they are the 10 out of 10s this year. And they're the movies that I think are masterpieces. Like, everything else on my list was really good, but you could kind of like shuffle them around. These two, I think, are like standouts to the best. Number 2, Aftersun. It took me a couple watches for this to fully sink in and for me to join the club on like people who were like uncontrollably sobbing at the ending. But second watch, uncontrollably sob I did. And more so than any film this year, it really just stuck with me. Even after the first watch, when I was still putting together the pieces and what I felt about it, just reflecting on it, I was like, oh, this is just fucking sad. Like, shit. And then I was just sitting there feeling the movie, and it was just sort of like washing over me. And not many films like wash over you like that long after you've seen them, but this is like hours later. I think Charlotte Wells just made a film about something deeply difficult that her soul wrestles with probably constantly, and she didn't sacrifice all of the difficult questions that conflict entails. It's asking questions rather than trying to provide answers about what this relationship is. One thing's for sure, though, it is definitely about the cold, hard reality of the toll that depression takes on one's mind, and how it is so powerful that it can create a massive rift between you and then the thing that you maybe even love the most. And like, how do you reconcile that? And I think as sad as the film is, it's sort of an invitation to heal in the process of watching it. If you have been through anything like this, I have not. Maybe someday. Well, maybe someday I'll have something really bad happen to me like that. I didn't even get to how beautifully Charlotte Wells communicates this conflict without telling you anything. I mean, the entire movie is just a crazy example of show and not tell. And there are some scenes that hit like really, really hard. And there are other scenes that feel like they didn't even need to be in the movie. Like, they're just there. But what I think is powerful about even those scenes is, you know, again, like the shot that's not over the fucking shoulder, where you can see two people in the frame, is often just very powerful in itself, and Charlotte Wells uses this a lot. And you just watch them just be and exist, and I think it acknowledges that there is something meaningful in just that, in just the ordinary moments, where it seems like absolutely nothing is wrong. This feels like it's completely normal. And the ending, with the editing and the music, absolutely gutted me. I just really haven't seen many films that were just that powerful. I'm really, really interested in what she's gonna do next. My number 2 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. We talk about this movie at every video that we make. But we don't always talk about why we like it. So. Yeah, I love that this movie makes silliness like a part of its philosophy. Swiss Army Man did the same thing. And Swiss Army Man and this movie are both films where it really feels like they almost crafted their own manifesto about life. The little symbols in this movie, from the eyeballs and the bagels. And there was a great quote by one of the Daniels when they were saying, oh, you know, it's a lot to ask for somebody's time when you make a movie. And so we're going to really try to make an impact on the person watching it. Like, we're going to kind of try to change their life or their perspective. And like, you actually did it too. Yeah, and a lot of people really feel like this movie changed their perspective. Yeah, which is insane. Their nihilism. The interesting thing about this movie as an action film is that like, it's about people fighting, because it's about people who are at war with the universe or their own meaninglessness. They're all fighting in some way. And of course, Ke Huy Quan's character, you know, he's fighting in the very interesting way of kindness. And cookies. You know, I will admit, like, it's not the deepest or most, like, revolutionary thing I've ever heard, I guess, but I do love the message. And every time I watch this movie, it's been 3 times, I feel it very deeply. Actually, the first time I didn't feel it that well. My God, stylistically, the Daniels are on another level. The way that they're incorporating visual effects in this low budget way that just feels so fun and playful. Every scene is just a toy box to pull out like some crazy shit or like a dildo or whatever. It's just the most playful movie like ever. I feel like they just literally sit around, and especially Shiner, because he has this background in like improv comedy or just comedy sketches, I guess. And he's like, well, what if there was a universe when people talk by not making noise? And then he goes, yeah, and then so they're at a funeral and everybody is going, except for the person who's at the podium and they're just silent. I just imagine that for like a half a second, and I was like, that's fucking hilarious. My impression watching interviews with them is that he's the one who comes up with like the craziest shit, because he says to Dan Kwan, he's like, thanks for letting me make our movie weirder. My impression maybe is that Dan Kwan is the one who's a little bit more grounding the movie emotionally. I think he's a little deeper, but maybe that's not true.
No, I think they're actually very different. I think
Yeah.
that they are collaborating in a unique way. Like, they're not the same person.
Also, the feat of editing that this movie is, stacking all these different universes on top of each other, but maintaining this great emotional through line where you're connecting deeply emotionally with it, while there's like somebody sucking on a mustard out of a hot dog in someone's finger, and there's like feet playing the piano, and then there's a raccoon like flying in the air. All the while you're feeling this great connection to these characters. You're understanding the revelations they're having about like the universe. Like, what movie is this?
Yeah, like, it made me question whether I was like crying about Raccacoonie. Like, there's another universe that was like making me like get the feels, and then it was like Raccacoonie was being taken away, and I was like, am I crying from this now? Like, it's just a really fucking weird experience.
And the performances in this movie are amazing. Michelle Yeoh, absolutely brilliant. Ke Huy Quan, Stephanie Hsu. I love that Stephanie Hsu actually got like what was deserved for her. Nobody is dissecting goofiness and silliness in such a substantive way.
Or just making goofiness feel like it means something, or can mean something.
Well, it's your turn to talk about the movie. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm talking about the movie now because it's my number one movie, no shit. I feel like no one else was necessarily trying to make the best movie ever. But this movie feels like it was trying to be the best movie ever. And it's really, really weird that it succeeded. It feels like it's kind of always on the edge of like falling off in one direction like too far, and then just becoming like, okay, like, you lost me. And I honestly did feel that way in the first viewing. I was like a little overwhelmed and a little overstimulated, and I was like, all right, well, I probably need a second watch on that. Second, third, and fourth watches. I'd never watch movies 4 times. It just keeps getting better. It probably enters the my favorite movies ever club. It's like a little tiny club of movies that I feel like are not only my favorite, like I really enjoy them, but they just feel like they matter. They feel like they make life a little more meaningful. Because I really do think this movie is about some of the deepest, most core shit that's important to get right about life, which is that it's really, really easy to just look around and be like, okay, well, of course nothing matters. There's no way I can make sense of anything mattering. But when Ke Huy Quan takes over the third act, he just might convince you that there is something that's higher and more worth fighting for. And I like the Wayman philosophy is like just as good as any like religious text that I could possibly read. If you're in any situation, you can probably think about Waymond and like what he would do, and you will benefit from that. Everybody has their own little slice of Waymond. Like, we all can think of someone in our lives, hopefully. It's kind of sad if there's no one, like absolutely nobody. But the Waymond is there to remind us that there may just be a better choice than just to give up on things and to say like, nah, and just to try to escape the dread or the sadness of whatever life is throwing at you. Waymond reminds us that there is something to appreciate in every single situation, about every single person. And I think there's something deeply true about just like spreading that light like around to the people near you. We have a movie that's about like the literal consumption of the universe by despair. And then just this tiny little Waymond light is enough, right? Just a little bit of light's enough to abolish like all of the darkness. The journey that I went on in my 4 viewings of this film is just very unlike any other that I've seen. And it's amazing that movies can take you to a place like that. I absolutely agree with the sentiment that this will inspire an entire generation of filmmakers. Not only does it seem to connect very deeply with like the younger millennial or Gen Z audience, but it's also made in a way that is very stylistically familiar to us, given that we're inundated with so much content, just an overwhelming ocean of content that is hitting us like at the same time, going from like a sad video to like a fucking hilarious video to
TikTok
to like something that makes us like absolutely anxious and despairing, all of these things trying to like capture and consume our attention, and that is encapsulated in their style. And then yet to have a movie that seems to sort of play into this, but then like releases you from all of that. We're gonna bring it right back to like rocks, mother-daughter, just sharing a moment in the real world. It's just wonderful.
My number 1 of the year is Aftersun. Everything Everywhere is hard to beat, but there's just one movie of the year that will not leave my head. Ever since I saw it, where I expected good things, like I heard good things, but I knew nothing about it. And, you know, I watched it and I was like, okay, this is good. Like, there's something in here and I don't know, like, what exactly it's building to. And the last 5 minutes of the movie completely knocked me out. And then I spent, like, the next 20 minutes just recovering and being like, wait a minute, like, this movie is so good. Like, holy shit, this movie's good. I sat with that until I watched it again. And when I watched it again, I was like, it's even better. It's even better than I thought. I have a whole analysis on this movie, so I probably won't go, like, super at length talking about it. There's literally a 20-minute video of me talking about it. Why is this movie living in my head rent-free? It doesn't even approach a climax in a conventional way. There's someone who is like, I don't think this movie even has a character arc. I think for me, where it fills in the gap of a character arc, or maybe that is the character arc, is like the space between Sophie as an 11-year-old and Sophie as a 31-year-old. And all the implied pain that went on in there, that is, I think, part of the magic of the movie.
That's definitely the character arc, I feel.
It has a very unique style and approach, and the movie sits with you as if the whole thing was a memory. And it feels like the way that it was constructed almost plays into that of a memory. And the way that you go back to these scenes that seem sort of mundane and ordinary after you're done watching the movie and think, oh, but there was this little detail in there that maybe hinted at, you know, the dad feeling this way. Like, that's how Sophie feels at 31, watching back all this footage, trying to reconcile the deep love that she had for her dad with the distance that was between them. I think it's very insightful about the fact that these loving relationships do exist where there's distance and there is unmistakably as much love as there could be in any relationship. Paul Mescal and Frankie Corio, they have such a great chemistry. The movie would not have worked if they didn't both feel so effortless.
Especially if Frankie Corio wasn't, like, that good.
Yeah, Frankie Corio was just so perfect. And I did feel that there actually was quite a lot of intention in all these little scenes, even the ones where you kind of pass by and you think maybe that was nothing. On my second watch, I found something of note in, I think, every scene. The last shot where the camera does a 360 spin, that's like one of the best shots I've ever seen. And it's moments like that where this movie is just pure magic. It's also one of the most emotionally devastating movies I can think of. So, and honestly, it probably is one of my favorite movies at this point. If you need me to talk more about the movie, then there's the analysis waiting for you, so go watch it. But that's all I'm going to say about the number one movie of 2022.
Well, those are the movies that we liked the best.
If your favorite movie is not on here, it's because you
the movie
watch your
sucked.
movie correctly, and we have a better understanding of it than you do. We understand why you're wrong.
Top 10 is really about, like, are you correct? Like, did you like the right movies? And if you didn't, then you're wrong.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing.
Which filmmakers make you want to see their next movie the most?